All right. Guys, welcome again to Unite. Come on, give it up. Come on, good job. Y'all made it here. I'm very happy to be here today, to be back. So I'm going to kind of jump right into it, all right? I don't have like a really, I know like sometimes I have like funny stories in the beginning. I don't. And they're not even that funny anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But kind of what Dan was talking about before, we're going to walk through the book of Esther. Who's ever heard of Esther? Has anyone ever read the full book of Esther? Cool. Nice. So if you haven't, that's okay. Because part of what I want to do this year is that if the Bible is God-breathed, if those words are from God, then why not walk through a whole book of the Bible? I mean, why not walk through the whole Bible? It'd be really cool, but we may not get to go from beginning to end. But I think this is a really cool series because we get to talk through a full book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you, okay, to read it on your own in the next 3 weeks. There's 10 chapters, so we're going to go through 4 chapters today in basically like 20 minutes, so it's going to be a lot of summarizing it. But I'm going to challenge you to read it yourself because it's a really, really cool book, really interesting. And I want to let you know, too, that because there's so much stuff that we're not going to be able to cover for the next 3 weeks, we're going to try to hop on social media and, just explain some more, verses in Esther and speak into that because there's so much of it, all right? You guys ready to dive into this? All right, cool. So Esther it's a story that takes place 100 years after the Jews got exiled out of where they lived. The Babylonians kind of like kicked them out, and the Jewish communities moved into different places after being like dispersed. A lot of them went back to Jerusalem, but this story specifically takes place in a Jewish community, a Jewish community living in Susa in ancient, the capital, Persia, all right? So the Jews were kind of looked down upon at this time, but anytime I want to tell a story, I need to kind of have a visual. So I'm going to make these characters into maybe people you know. So number 1 is Esther. Playing Esther today is going to be, hit it, Allie, Wonder Woman. Who knows Wonder Woman? That's right. Okay, she's Wonder Woman. The next one, so Esther's the queen, right? So, not right, you'll know soon. The next character is Uncle Mordecai. So hold on, before we go to Uncle Mordecai, who is the greatest uncle in TV history? Oh, man, I should have thought of that. Oh, Uncle Jesse, put it up there. Oh, my, come on. Mordecai. Okay, so Uncle Jesse will be playing Mordecai today. King Xerxes is going to be played by Lord Farquaad. Yeah. And the last character is Haman, and Haman will be played by the one and only Jafar. You guys know who Jafar is? Yeah. I gotta be completely honest. I never watched. Is that Aladdin? I only saw the show choir. That's how I connected it. Okay, you don't like Aladdin? Oh, okay. Oh, I'll go home and watch Aladdin. Jeez Louise. All right, so just keep these people in mind when I talk about these 4 characters. So I'm going to start walking through this story. Try to pay attention. I know it's going to be a lot, but here we go. So King Xerxes, remember who King Xerxes was? Who? Farquaad, that's right, Farquaad. You sound like you're from like the north when you say Farquaad. Maybe not. So King Xerxes, he threw this party for 187 days. It's a 187-day rager, right? Some of you might be thinking, wow, yeah, that's a party I want to be at. 187 days, though? Absolutely not, okay? Let's get this out of the way. And he threw this party for his officials and his officers. And at the end of the party, after the 6-month party, he threw an extended party for 7 days for the common people. So like us, common folk, that's almost like us being invited to the White House, the Jonas Brothers concert, I don't know, something like that. But the purpose of this party, this is where I'm getting at. The purpose of this party was to display his greatness and his splendor, right? He wanted to show off his swag. He wanted to show his drip to everyone. And we still say that? I heard I heard a new word today, and I was like, I'm not gonna try. So he was also probably want to get everyone on his good side because he's brand new to being king. And what better way to have people take your side than to throw a party with great food, the best drinks, decoration, and everything handed to you. And you can sleep there for 187 days. So the story then introduces, again, I'm like cutting out so much because there's so much to cover, but so the party's going on. The story then introduces Queen Vashti. Queen Vashti is the wife of King Xerxes. So she was throwing a party of her own. So she wasn't in this palace with him. And on the last day of the feast, the king had partied too much and made a really, really dumb request. So I'm going to read in verse 10. It says, on the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Now, he wasn't like saying this is my girl, and like it's like a cool thing. Like it was not a good thing. And he said, get my girl, let's show her off to the whole parties, and this is what happened. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, when they told Queen Vashti, she refused to come to be showed off in front of all of his buddies. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Well, good for the queen, right? Good for her. The king was corrupt and prideful. That's something that we'll get into on outside of today. There's a whole backstory of King Xerxes and how he became to be, but he's a corrupt and prideful king. Not a king that obeyed God for the good of his people whatsoever. And this is how he not just treated anyone, but his own wife, to show her off like she was an object. So the king was angry. He calls his closest buds, and he's like, what do I do about this? They're like, well, you got to kick her out. She can't be queen anymore. And so he kicks her out. And it's like a bunch of frat boys got together, and you'll know what I mean in a second. And they're like, you should do this. How about this? How about you hold a beauty pageant? To summon that up. Because he wants to find a new queen. So they suggest that they get all of the women in the empire to line up and essentially date the king. That's how I'm going to put it. It goes into detail in the actual story if you want to read it. It's like The Bachelor, Persia edition. I'm just saying. So if you know, you know. Or a really, really bad soap opera. It's exactly what it is. I mean, what incredible friends and a great idea. Not at all. This was not a good idea. It's not a good thing. And I want to say this first off. We're reading scripture, reading the Bible. We're not promoting this, all right? Don't go and start acting like King Xerxes. This is real life, and horrible things have happened in this time. And what we need to hear, which we'll get to, but I want to just say it now, is that even in craziness and horrible events and stupidity, God can still make something good. And he is ultimately on the throne, okay? And we'll see that throughout the whole book. So now enters Mordecai, Uncle Jesse, and Esther, Wonder Woman. So these are the next 2 chapters. That was chapter 1, okay? So Mordecai is Esther's uncle, hence Uncle Jesse, the greatest uncle on TV. You guys see when Uncle Jesse sang to, I cried so much. That was so sad. You guys, never mind. I'll pull it up next time. So Mordecai is Esther's uncle. And the backstory is that her parents had died, and Mordecai essentially adopted her, okay? So what we need to know right away is Esther and Mordecai, they are Jewish. So the women in this beauty pageant that's lining up to date the king so he can pick a queen, they're all Persians. Now, we don't know if, these women were taken and hand-selected by the officials, or if the women, stepped up to this because they wanted to be queen. Either way, Queen Esther, well, not queen, spoiler alert, Esther was part of this bachelor, in Persia, in this pageant. So she made it through round 1, and she was doing so well that one of the assistants in the palace gave her the best food, the best living space, and the best beauty treatment. So I'm going to go on. This one's going to be quick, but verse 10 says, Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Mordecai said, don't tell them you're Jewish. Don't. Something bad can really happen to us because they don't like us. And every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the palace, the harem, to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. He was a very concerning uncle. So Esther wasn't supposed to be in this so-called beauty pageant. She even hid her faith from everyone on command from her uncle. But God knew. God knew that Esther was going to do something great despite that. So verse 17 says, now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women. Here it is. She won his favor and approval more than any other women. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Queen Vashti. So Esther, an unlikely Jew, hiding her identity, which isn't something really to, maybe look up to. She hid her faith, but she gets appointed to be queen of Persia. And then Xerxes threw a banquet, of course. So the story goes on. Are you guys following this? All right, because it's like a drama. Yeah. So the story goes on. It seems like Mordecai lives outside this gate, continually checking on his niece. Or some people believe that actually she got him a job out there. But coincidentally, he overhears two officers of the king plotting to kill him. And this is what it says in verse 21. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Sometimes these Old Testament names, Bigthana and Teresh. So two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes, Lord Farquaad. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. So the queen was like, hey, listen, these guys are planning to kill you. I don't know if she said my uncle. Mordecai outside, who's guarding your gate, he's the one that said it. Just want to let you know. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. Nice. Great. Yeah, yep, they got him there. So he was giving credit, Esther was giving credit to Mordecai, but nothing came about it. He wasn't treated any different. No reward, no recognition. And you'll see next week kind of how that plays out. But a coincidence, we would say, right? That he just happened to be there at that exact time in front of the gates overhearing this conversation. So the last character we introduce is a man named Haman. Who is Haman? Jafar. So Haman was appointed the highest position in the kingdom under King Xerxes. So everyone had to bow down to him. Side note, because of his background, he also hated the Jews. And you may see where this is going if you remember who the two Jewish people are in this story. So Esther and Mordecai. So everyone at the gates would bow down when Haman would walk in. So two guards noticed that Mordecai wasn't bowing down, Uncle Jesse. They asked him why, and he confessed. He confessed that he was a Jew and he doesn't bow down to men. He gave up his identity to them. The one thing that he told Esther not to do, don't tell them we're Jewish. So these two officers, they tattletaled on him to Haman, and that obviously got Haman really, really angry. So once Haman also found out that Mordecai was Jewish, he got even more angry. So he doesn't just take it out on Mordecai, he takes it out on the whole Jewish community. So Haman persuades the king, that's his right-hand man, persuades King Xerxes to put together a decree to destroy all of the Jews in the community. All of them. Every single one of them. And to decide that date of this annihilation, he rolls the dice. It's called P-U-R. That's how they set dates. And they set the date when they're going to be killed. Then Haman and the king, you guessed it, they have a banquet to celebrate this horrible decision that they just made. You guys following that? Mordecai's mad. I'm sorry. Haman is mad. The whole Jewish community, they set a date to annihilate all the Jews. So I'm going to read now word for word. This is in the Message Bible for the rest of chapter 4. This is where we're kind of going to wrap up in the actual story. So when Mordecai learned what had been done, he ripped his clothes to shreds and put on sackcloth and ashes. This is something they do in that culture when they are weeping, when they are lamenting. Like those like sacks that you do like those jump races in? It's kind of like that, right? Yeah, that's what you would put on, but you won't race in it. You sob in it. Then he went out in the streets of the city, crying out with loud and bitter cries. He came only as far as the king's gate, because no one dressed in sackcloth was allowed to enter the king's gates. So as the king's order was posted, basically the king put it everywhere in the town that on this date, all the Jews are going to be killed. He plastered it everywhere. There was a loud lament among the Jews. There was fasting, weeping, and wailing, and most of them stretched out on sackcloth and ashes. They also put the sackcloth on them too as they were weeping and crying. So Esther's maids, now we're back in the palace, Queen Esther at her best. Queen Esther, her maids came and told her about what's going on outside the gate with Mordecai. So the queen was stunned. Now she had no idea that this was going on. So she sent fresh clothes to Mordecai so he can take off the sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept the sackcloth. Esther called for, I'm going to give this a shot, Hathach, one of the royal eunuchs whom the king had assigned to wait on her, and told him to go to Mordecai and get the full story of what was happening. So she goes, I got to figure out what's happening. He's not taking clothes. What's going on in the town? So she sends this messenger, Hathach, to go find out what's going on. So Hathach, the messenger, went to Mordecai in the town square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He also told him the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to deposit in the royal bank to finance the massacre of the Jews. One thing we skipped over was that Haman actually paid the king to assassinate these people. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the bulletin that had been posted in town, in Susa, ordering the massacre so he can show it to Esther when he reported back with instructions to go to the king and intercede and plead with him for her people. So Mordecai said, please show her this. Tell her that the king is trying to assassinate all of the Jews. Plead with him to reverse this decree, is what he wants. So Hathach came back, the messenger came back and told Esther everything Mordecai had said. You following? All right. Esther talked it over with her messenger and then sent him back to Mordecai with this message, saying, everyone who works for the king here, even the people out in the provinces, knows that there is a single fate for every man and woman who approaches the king without being invited, and that's death. The one exception is if the king extends his golden scepter, then he or she may live. And it's been 30 days now since I've been invited to come to the king. So now this focus is on Mordecai and Esther in this chapter. They were the only hope for the Jewish people. She was going to ask for a reversal of the decree, but this is what it was saying in the last part. Approaching the king would be without a royal request is really, really bad. So if he doesn't hold out his scepter, she could be killed if she approached him, just because she's interrupting his schedule. And at this point, he has not requested to see her in a month, so Esther's like, I don't even think he wants to see me, so there's a bigger chance of him like not holding out his scepter and allowing me to talk to him, because he hasn't even wanted to see me in a month, his own wife. So she expresses her concerns to Mordecai through the messenger. Mordecai then comes back at Esther with the most famous statement made in all of this book, also where we're going to end. He says, and who knows though, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Maybe you are in this position for such a time as this. Maybe everything that's going on right now, all the craziness in town, and then you being in that position, was for a purpose, was for a reason. Now the rest of the story, just to sum it up, she's like, all right, tell the Jews that to pray for me and fast I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to go approach him. And if I die, I die. She really steps up her courage. If I die, I die. But I'm going to go try to reverse that decree to save the Jews. So I'm going to end there. Those 4 chapters summed up. Like I said, I'd love to challenge you to read on your own. I know there's a lot that we just read through, we talked about. And again, the series will be a lot of that. And I just want to pull out 2 things, though. 2 things that we can maybe relate to, that we already read. But first, I want to show you this. So here are some ingredients. We got flour, we got salt. Okay. We got, let me see, we got some butter, olive oil and sea salt. But I don't have, you're not going to eat those. I mean, yeah, maybe you'll eat butter if you're one of those, what is that coffee you do, the bulletproof coffees? You're not going to eat a raw egg unless you're a massive CrossFitter. You're not going to eat a teaspoon of vanilla extract by itself. Vanilla extract smells delicious, but you don't want to eat it. You don't eat those things, right? These ingredients. But when you put these in the hands of a gifted baker, something great comes out of it. Okay. Zane started that because he's the one that put the icing on it, okay? All right, so listen here. If you put those ingredients together in in front of a gifted baker, they're going to make something that tastes good, right? But maybe those things individually don't taste good. But you give it to someone who knows how to do it, it'll look beautiful, it'll taste amazing. There's going to be moments where things in life just don't taste good. There will come a time, where God will make everything beautiful in its time for those who know him and love him. For those who know him and love him. So God appointed an incredibly corrupt king, King Xerxes, number 1. Then Esther lied about her faith to be queen. Haman, crazy enough, was appointed supreme leader under King Xerxes to make any decision he wants to make to annihilate the Jews. None of that stuff tastes good. None of those ingredients seem like they're going to go together and make something nice, right? Not one of those things, not one of those situations. But God, which you'll see in the next couple of chapters, is using those ingredients to fulfill his purpose. Could it be that God was using deceit, corruption, and craziness for something good? Could it be that he still does that now? When I think of the worst event, in history, I think of the Holocaust. And actually it's similar to what's going on here, but you cannot think that something good came out of that. But something small maybe did. And if you look this up, Israel wasn't a province. Wasn't its own nation. Sorry, it wasn't a nation until after the Holocaust. The countries came together and said, "These Jews, they need a place where they can reside," and something good came out of it. But you would never know, thinking through, being in the middle of those years in the Holocaust, that something good was going to come about that. See, God is at work in the details even when it doesn't look like it. That was our first point. God is at work in the details even when it does not look like it. Things in your life may look confusing. It may seem like it doesn't make sense, but could it be that God is working in the details of your life when you don't realize it? Now, please don't get confused that God is putting hardships on you and he's sitting back laughing at the fact that you're failing classes, that your parents are going through a divorce, that your relationships are falling apart. God is not wanting that for us, but we are sinful people living in a sinful world. Could it be, though, that God is using those things for something greater in your life? To grow your faith, to glorify him? Now, maybe there's hurt happening in your home. There's conflict going on between you and your parents. Anxiety is taking over your life. You're confused, and those are the ingredients that may taste horrible right now. But God is the author and perfecter of our lives. I'll say it again. God is the author and perfecter of our lives, who can turn anything into something beautiful. And if we are in relationship with Christ, we will one day see that beauty when we get to meet our Creator in heaven. And that itself is worth it. So number 2, kind of going along with that, because that's going to be our running point for the rest of this series. But number 2 is your life has been placed and shaped on purpose. We've been talking about this the past couple of weeks now. Mordecai, in urging Esther to take action, points her to a higher purpose. Who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? He frames it as a possibility for her to consider. Could it be that God has placed Esther in her royal position just because of the clear and present danger the Jews are in? It was just such a time of crisis, a time of threat that the Jews needed her. It was no accident that Esther became queen of Persia. She was there for a reason. And Mordecai was right. Esther was indeed on the throne for such a time as this, and she became God's instrument to help the Jews that we will see in the next couple weeks. So I want to read this in Ephesians 1:11 to remind you that we serve a God who works out everything in His will. Furthermore, because we are united with Christ, we have received an inheritance from God, for He chose us in advance, and He makes everything work out according to His plan. As the experience of Esther shows, God uses people in fulfilling His purpose. No matter what the situation, God has His instruments of deliverance and victory. For such a time as this, God has brave, committed, obedient individuals who will step out in faith and accomplish His work. We, like Esther, have choices to make. We may not have as much power and influence right now as Esther had, but God has still placed us where He wants us to be for such a time as this. We're not here by accident. I want you to know that. Your life has been placed and shaped on purpose. He has placed us in the time, the position, and the place that He wants us to be. I know that might sound crazy, because I know some of you are just dealing with it. You see, He invites us to confidently join in His work. In Esther's day, the duty to save a nation fell to her, and God had given her all that she needed to accomplish the task. God has done the same for us. Whatever the task He assigns, He will use us in such a time as this. Are you willing to say yes to that? That's a huge thing. Are you willing to say yes to that? I believe we will once we truly realize that our lives have been shaped and placed on purpose for the glory of Jesus Christ. Let's worship together. Let's pray. God, thank you.